Welcome everyone in person and on Zoom. Great to see you guys. As you're grabbing in a plate, make yourself a plate and get comfortable. And Chag Tu B'Shvat Sameach. Happy Tu B'Shvat. Quickly jumping the ranks as one of my favorite holidays. Want to say a big thank you as always to Murray and Tova. Thank you to Murray and Tova. I'm going. I'll have whatever, but you don't have to make me explain it. What? As we're settling in, I want to ask you a question, and I'm going to get the source sheet up on Zoom for you guys. But I want to know, what is the last time that you felt overcome with the sense of the preciousness of life? And it could be life in any of its forms. So human life, it could be nature, animal, trees in honor of Tu B'Shvat, something that really instilled in you. So I'm actually, Elliot, I'm going to call on you first, but I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to ponder that. And then Elliot, I'll call on you in just a minute as we think. Let me get this source sheet. Good, that's a good answer.
What did she say?
When was the last time she said every day? She said every day. My phone there.
I don't know where your phone is.
Is your phone?
Well, I put a phone here.
Here.
And David, I put a phone here.
Okay, I'm going to start calling on people. I'm going to start calling. So Elliot's going to go first. When was the last time you felt overcome with the sense of how precious life is? Life, either human, animal, plants. What do you think? Go ahead.
More so, when I get up in the morning and I say in French, Moda ani lefanecha. And more so, each moment, especially when I interact with people, am I acting in a way that Hashem would want me to interact? Because that's a special moment that can never be repeated. They have long-term influences.
That's beautiful. And I never knew I speak fluent French. So thank you for teaching me. But no, that's it. So every moment, which is hard, right? Ideally, we want to get to that level. And it's amazing if you're able to achieve that, right? To feel that and to feel like every interaction is precious and can have a long-standing impact. But we can easily forget that, but a good reminder. Anybody else? Last time you felt it? Yes.
I'm very blessed to have my grandchildren in town.
What's that?
And they bring me extraordinary feelings, joy and preciousness, beyond words, beyond feeling.
What are their names?
Hey.
Sorry, I didn't put that spot. I was just curious.
Abigail, Elisheva, Yocheved.
Wow, beautiful. Wow.
Now, what are their birthdays?
All French names, good French names.
When I think about what's going on in Gaza, and I think about step into a grocery store here and you see all this bounty and you just think, gosh, who am I to deserve all this and other people don't get it? When I think about how precious my life is,
Absolutely. Yeah. And a good reminder on Tu B'Shvat, right? To reflect on how grateful we are to have food, to have all this bounty and how precious that is, that not everyone does, right? Good. Always a good reminder. Yes.
I am more than grateful to have lived to these wonderful years, having actually lived about 5 lifetimes in my lifetime, starting with the war in London and so on and so forth. But I get very sad when I'm around people who are always complaining about something and they don't appreciate just what they've got. I am grateful, Baruch Hashem, every day. Thank you.
Every day.
Every day.
You know, I was just at this Rabbi Alex and I were at a prayer conference in Los Angeles, and what it was exploring innovative prayer in a traditional synagogue, conservative synagogue, and what that could look like. And it was really interesting. In one of the sessions, because there were different sessions, there is currently a student at Ziegler, my rabbinical school, who is from Uganda, and he and his wife moved to LA to attend school, and his father-in-law, so his wife's father is a rabbi in the Abu Udaye community. It's a Jewish community in Uganda. It's an amazing thing. And
What was
he
the
was
guy's
telling
name
me.
was here?
We met the rabbi.
Oh,
We've met the rabbi. The chief rabbi.
Bersha Suzume.
Yeah. He's doing his Shabbat. Not here.
Oh, you did? Okay.
But he's here for the Shabbatot.
Amazing. But he was saying that when they first came to LA, it was actually Daphne. So his wife Daphne was saying that when they first moved to LA and they had warm showers and showers at all, or just go to the faucet. And, she actually grew up as you would maybe stereotypically assume when you think of like, a tribal lifestyle. She actually did. She would go and get the jugs of water from the well and on her head, carry it that was her experience of having. So just that appreciation for what's at our fingertips. And absolutely. Could easily forget. Good. Anybody else before we dive in? Yes.
Well, I recollect a very sad time when we take life for granted and everything's wonderful. And I left my house at 20 after 9. When I came back at 20 after 10, I was a widow.
Wow.
What was that? I didn't hear.
She said
What was
she
the?
left her house at 20 before 9. She came back 20 after 9 and she was a widow. Thank you for sharing. That's heartbreaking.
And after that, I'm just going to throw in that I think about this maybe, hopefully not in a maudlin way, but often enough to try to be appreciative because any minute could be your last minute.
So I'll use that as a segue. Very sadly, I'm mourning the death of my grandfather yesterday. He died yesterday. Yeah, the funeral's on Monday. It had to be postponed a little, but it's in Florida, so I'll be going after Shabbos. I'll leave on Sunday. So actually, I'd love to dedicate this learning to him. His name is Howard Weiss. If anybody, I actually think it's a nice tradition. Maybe we can do this going forward with our lunch and learns, that we can open up our learning with a dedication. If anybody wants to dedicate the learning in someone's name. So I'll actually open up now if anybody else wants to dedicate this learning
Let
today.
us be yours.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Just for your family. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just share briefly that, hey, great to see you. So glad you came. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sarah Pollitt, took Rabbi Josh's intro class and decided to come today.
Yay,
All that PTO I got stored.
thrilled to have you. Oh, and Murray says there's seconds if you want more, so plenty of food. Anyway, wonderful person, very scientific. He was a doctor. He had a great sense of humor. Helena was reminding me. And when I would call him towards the end, he would say, sensing, I think that it was near, that, I had an amazing life and what happens now is bonus, is extra. So he always had an amazing positive outlook, even in the face of a lot of challenge towards the end. So
Have you been ill for a while?
he recently was diagnosed with cancer.
Oh,
But he was actually undergoing chemo and it was working. So it was a shock that he passed in his sleep. Yeah, but thank you for asking. Today we're going to dive in now. I want us to talk about the preciousness of life and human life as we're talking. So some of our sources are going to deal with death. But also some of these sources are going to deal with nature and the preciousness of the natural world and life in all its forms. And the question of, is every living thing singing a song? This was a different text that we did, one of our first sessions, about every living creature singing forth a song, if only we could hear it. And this is going to continue along that theme. So there's the classic question, right? If a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? What's your favorite answer to that? Or how would you answer that?
yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody hears.
Somebody hears it.
Does it matter?
Something hears it.
Does it matter?
Does it matter? Right?
Say yes,
You'd say yes. How come?
just because we know when.
Right. So even if a human being isn't there to hear it, it's still making a sound. It's not necessary for a human to receive it in order for it to make a sound.
Anybody you know, you're not seeing them right now.
Right. Okay, good. Yes.
Read the book, but especially if the trees talk to each other, then they hear each other.
Good. So that's a quick plug. If anybody, and I'll make a plug at the end of this too, but we're having a Tu B'Shvat Seder tonight, 7:00 here. And it'll be a quick Seder followed by a book discussion of Peter Wollobin's The Hidden Life of Trees, How Trees Communicate and Feel and all these things. So it's this radical scientific theory that they actually are capable of a lot more than we give them credit for.
They do. They communicate through their roots, the root system.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. They're without going at length. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, no.
No, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say that there's something where you can analyze the weather conditions by looking at the rings in the globe. Yes.
Yes, it's amazing. And at the roots, they have fungus, all these like millions of fungi that send electrical impulses through other trees by the roots. And he called it the Wood Wide Web, the WWW, right? Anyway, so all this going on beneath the surface, which is silent to us. We don't hear it, but there is so much noise beneath the surface if we can tap into it.
There was something on the news this morning on NPR where apparently they have developed a treatment for people who were born with a certain type of deafness.
Yes.
They have a way of doing something in
Gene replacement.
where they will, I forgot what it is, but they are able to restore hearing to these people who had been deaf.
Wow, miraculous,
Age.
amazing. Yes, and then we're gonna dive in.
About it, even when the wood in your house is still living, it's a living thing, like the contractor says, it moves.
Mm.
It moves, so it's still alive.
Interesting, yeah, fascinating, right? Fascinating.
It also makes noises.
And it makes noises. It creaks.
Yeah.
Good. So let's dive in. Who would like to read? This is from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. I think it's a very interesting Midrash. Who would like to dive in? And if you're joining us for the first time, we're studying Midrash in this class. Midrash is a form of rabbinic commentary. Much of it is found in the Talmud, though this is actually a separate Midrashic collection. And there are two types of Midrash. There's Midrash Halacha, which deals with Jewish law, and then Midrash Agada, which is more stories and narrative, and that's what we're learning in this class. Okay, great. Please dive in.
Rabbi Levi said, "The Holy Blessed One knows the wonders God does for God's creations, but God's creations do not know the wonders that God does with them." It is taught that there are three things whose voices go from one end of the world to the other, and the creations are amongst them, but they do not sense them. And they are the sun, the rains, and the soul at the moment it goes out from the body. Where do we learn about this sun?
Okay, good. So I'll just pause. So we have the statement, and now come the proof texts, right? So there are three things whose voices go from one end of the world to the other. So that would make you think it's a loud sound, right? It's like the shot heard around the world, right? But we actually don't notice them. And these are them: the sun, the rains, and the soul the moment it leaves the body. Now let's prove it. Where do we learn about this, about the sun?
Does somebody want to continue?
Oh, go for it.
Okay. Rabbi Yehuda, son of Rabbi Eleh, said, "Do you think that the sun slides quietly along the firmament? Rather, it saws in the firmament like a saw."
Great. I'll pause real quick. Sorry to keep doing this.
Go right ahead. Go ahead.
So a little bit of rabbinic astronomy, I guess, is that they imagined a firmament in the heavens, from the Latin, I think, firmamentum, but basically a hammered out sheet. And when you look at the Mariv prayer, Golo or Valila, they imagine the sun and moon sort of rolling around this firmament. That's why it's the language of roll. The sun rolls from. So that when the rain comes from holes in the firmament, Okay, so because we know from Bereshit that there's the waters above and the waters below, right? So the waters above get to earth through the holes in the firmament. So that's sort
I
of,
have to just ask
Go
a
ahead.
question.
yes.
Which may be rolling around in many of our minds at the moment,
Sure.
or maybe it's just me. But if we now know that this is not true, how do we deal with it as a proof text?
Interesting. So I thought you were going to go a different way. Say, why do we still say that prayer in Ma'ariv if we know that scientifically it's not accurate? So I was prepping that answer.
Oh, well, I already have an answer in my mind for
Right.
that, which may not be one you like,
Well,
but
go ahead. What's
I think of it as kind of our historic poetry. I mean, we've been doing it. When we say these prayers, we're connecting with the past and we're connecting with the present, because all around the world, somebody's saying the prayer now.
right?
And all around the world through histories, as long as that prayer has existed, somebody said it. So I love the connectedness of it,
Yeah.
and it's kind of our people's poetry.
Right.
That's how I do it.
I would agree. And I think that there is still a truth. Does it have to be scientifically accurate in order for it to contain a deep spiritual truth? And I think the liturgists, the writers of that prayer, experience the world a certain way and are honestly articulating that. And so I think there is still a truth that we can affirm, even if it's not scientifically accurate. So, but in this case,
Almost
how
like
could it be a proof
emotion.
text?
It's like
Sorry?
emotion. In other words, there are things that you can feel, and that is really
Ah.
religion.
Yeah, maybe it's more what's behind it is the emotion it's trying to evoke. And that's still
Because
very
people-
relevant and valid.
The people who are not religious will say, well, this isn't true scientifically, and discard it rather than see something that's beautiful in it. Or that
Right.
it doesn't, I think we've come to the conclusion, it doesn't matter whether it's real all the time. If you think it's real, if it makes you feel better, don't we say to people, if it makes you feel better, and then it's okay.
Yeah, I would say certainly, and certainly with the prayer experience, trying to evoke a sense of awe for the preciousness of life and nature and the cycles that we find in nature that sustain life. But to answer your question, how can it be used as a proof text if a portion of it is inaccurate? I think it's okay because often what happens is proof texts are ripped from their context all the time. Like you go back and you read that what's around that proof text and you say, wait a minute, that's not what the intention of this verse is. The rabbis don't care. And that's sort of the beauty and frustration of Midrash, that you could rip something devoid of its context, but it's being, co-opted for an argument, but it's Torah and it's an interpretation of Torah, and that is held as legitimate and valid, even if it's sort of ripped from the context.
And I don't even say that I'm rejecting it on that basis. I'm just saying that it feels especially weak at the moment.
Sure, fair. So let's finish and then we'll continue to discuss. So that's the sun. That's how we get the
Okay.
proof there. Oh, that it's sawing. So instead of just like sort of quietly rolling, that it's actually, they're getting proof here that it is sort of making a sawing, a loud sound through it. We just can't hear that.
Where do we learn this about the rain? Rabbi Levi said, deep calls to deep at the sound of your spout.
Right, so this is from Psalms. This psalm was written by Bnei Korach, who were the children of Korach, sons of Korach.
They lived.
They lived, right. So Korah, who is Korah?
Rebellion.
We won't get good.
2 more weeks.
Yeah, that's right. But Korah stages a mutiny against Moses. Korah is also a Levi of the tribe that Moses and Aaron are, right? And he says, what makes you so special, right? We're all God's chosen people. Give us more elevated status and roles. So you could actually say he had a legitimate claim. He was of this family. He was like Moses' cousin, basically, right? But, and this is a larger conversation of were there any merits at all to his argument? But certainly the way he does it, I think is pretty unilaterally disapproved of. It was a staged mutiny. It was not done the right way. And it seemed self-aggrandizing. He was trying to get something for himself as opposed to what's best for everyone. Anyway, when at one point, Korah, because he has this whole group, a lot of the Jews follow him, of the Israelites, and as punishment, the earth opens and swallows Korah and Korah's rebellion. However, we know that Korah's B'nai Korach, the sons or the children of Korach, were not killed in this, the earth opening. They go on to write Psalms. They're in the book of Tehillim, of book of Psalms. A few are ascribed to them. So it's this amazing thing. It's often used when you talk about, do children pay for the sins of their fathers or their parents, right? But like, or that you are not trapped because of your parents to be a certain way, over your history, say, but that you can always do tshuva and have a different outcome.
Two questions about that. Number one, was it the sons that wrote it or grandsons? And number two is maybe they wrote them before the Korah thing
Oh, interesting.
and they survived.
Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure. I think it's generally thought of as they wrote it afterwards and are the direct children that the tradition has been passed on. But I'm actually, it's a good question. I'm not certain.
I'm gonna.
I know you're always gonna.
I'm gonna put a roadblock in front of you every time.
Yeah. But you're not supposed to do no stumbling blocks before the blind.
I said a roadblock, not stumbling block. You're not supposed to stumble over.
That's true.
You're supposed to
That's true.
stop you, to make you think.
Right. But so this verse from this psalm says, deep calls to deep at the sound of your spouse. So that again goes to this rakia, this firmament imagery of these like celestial or like sieves, like a sieve, like a water sieve. It's sort of what holds back the flow, the water channel, and then it pours through these holes. And anyway, so that here it is. It makes a sound, right? It says likol tznorecha, right? It makes a sound. Tznorecha. Okay.
You think anybody here?
When you think of sounds, when we were talking before, if the tree falls in the forest and no one's around you,
Yeah.
they make a sound. What you hear in the way of a sound, some people will hear the same sound will be made. Some will hear it strongly, it's an auditory thing. And some of them will hear it as a big blast. You have people who yell out, you're talking too loudly, and someone else will say, I can't hear you.
Right. So the subjectivity of it all, right? It depends.
So it is
Everybody
alive.
receives the sound differently.
So it does become something alive.
Right. Oh, interesting. So it's, yeah.
And that's the beauty to it. That again, we don't have one answer to anything.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
We make the joke about, Jews ask a question, everything's a question. There is no one answer. We allow for a variety of answers and
Yeah, you're making me think of Shamor v'Zachor, right? B'dibur echad.
Yeah.
So, right, is it in one place it says to keep Shabbat, and another place it says remember Shabbat, keep it holy. And so the question is, which one was it? Did God say in the commandments, was it to keep or remember? And the rabbis, because once is how it's given in the Torah, but right at the actual event at Sinai, and the other is how Moses recounts it. And then the rabbis say, Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad, that Shamor v'Zachor, keep and remember, were both said in the same word. One thing said, multiple things heard. Right, so we experience sound, but you're saying that maybe sound in itself is alive in a way because it can be dynamic and heard different. That's interesting.
I always think of it as remember to keep.
Remember to keep.
Remember to keep.
Remember to keep. That's a good way to reconcile it. Okay, let's keep reading. Sorry that we've stopped so many times.
No, where do we learn this about the soul? Rabbi Shmuel, brother of Rabbi Pinchas, the son of Hama, was in Siknin, and his fellows thought to visit him when a joking matter came, and they laughed. He, Rabbi Pinchas, said, the voice of the soul of my brother is breaking cedar wood and uprooting trees, and you sit here and don't know.
Right, so we have comforting the mourner. But, in the course of as tends to happen, depending on the Shiva, but generally it can turn social and somebody says something funny and you laugh, right? It's not a crime per se, but sometimes levity and humor actually helps in the grieving process, absolutely. But here, Rabbi Pinchas is saying, how could you be laughing at this moment? The voice, the voice of the soul of my brother is, who has just departed, his soul, the sound of his soul leaving the body is making such a noise that with such intensity that it is breaking these mighty cedar woods and uprooting trees. but you clearly can't hear it because you're capable of laughter and light talk now. So it's also speaks to this isolation that mourners can feel in the time of their grieving, that how is it that the world goes on when my world is shattered? You know, the sun still comes up and people go about their day, but my,
It's black and gray.
right.
So beautiful. When my mother passed, I was like right above her when she took her last breath.
Wow.
And I swear that I could hear her talking to me, her soul. And it was like scary in a way.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. And I want to say, I know this is vulnerable ground, so thank you for sharing that.
Well, my mother comes through when I have the windows open at night and the moon floods in. And it surrounds me, and there's a halo there, and I know that she's with me. It's a miraculous feeling.
Yeah.
The
And these are,
spirit comes through, and she's been dead a long.
and it's personal. It's deeply personal,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It's not something that anybody in the same room might not.
Nobody could share that.
Yeah. It's intimate.
But it's always, you remember relatives or events based on, there are certain sounds and views that make you that reminds me of my mother.
Right.
It's the moon.
Right. And but to see it in the natural world around you too is interesting, right? And I want to make a quick distinction that we're not as Jews, right? We're very sensitive about deifying the natural world. We don't do that, right? You're even not supposed to pray under any leafy tree, but in the central place that God chooses for us to cause God's name to dwell, right? We centralize our worship in the temple. It's not meant to, because we don't want to go down that slippery slope of worshiping. We are defined against idolatry, right? We do not see God in the natural world. However, I think you could say that differently, right?
Whatever you want.
Yes. And that's what yes.
You could be out there.
Right. Sorry, I want to make a distinction. I think it's very Jewish and very good. And that's sort of the point of this teaching, is to see God in the natural world, but not to see the natural world as God. There are different ways there's so much theology within Judaism. Panentheism sees God as being everything. So the tree is a part of God. This table is a part of God. Everything is a part of God. But I just want to make a disclaimer to distinguish between this tree is God or
The creation of God.
Yeah.
Not God.
It's interesting,
Right.
because people like to worship outside. That's the big thing today. Not
Mhm.
necessarily under the trees. They're not trying to worship nature.
right.
But they
Let
think
them be
it's great to go outside and dogging outside, or like at camp when we would, it was a thrill. They considered it a thrill to be outside among nature.
Absolutely. And Nelson, I see your hand. I'm going to get you in just 1 second, but just to go off of that for a moment, Hitbodedut is a Hasidic practice of going out into nature for some quiet and alone time with the natural world. Keep in mind that this arises after the destruction of the temple, right? In the Torah, we become a centralized religion because I think, again, we're defining ourselves as being removed from the other nations that may pray to their gods, which are local deities and, idols and nature. So I think the centralization was a very important definition and step away from that. But with the destruction of the temple, there is certainly, and with things like Hitbodedut, a rich precedent in Jewish tradition for accessing God in nature. And you talk about Camp Ramah or other Jewish summer camp experiences that are so crucial for people because they're experiencing God in the natural world, and that you experience God everywhere is also deeply Jewish. Not, that everybody can, that there's no mediator or, yeah. Okay, so there's a lot in this text. But what I wanted to bring is this awe for the aliveness of all of God's creation, both human and natural, right? That the rains and the sun are singing a song or making a noise, right? Sawing through the firmament doesn't sound like a very beautiful song. It sounds like it's a little violent and cacophonous, but that everything is possessed of this deep inner song or sound that we can only tap into with a great deal of spiritual sensitivity. And then the sound of the soul leaving the body, right? How we all experience grief in our own ways, and it's deeply personal and intimate. But also that there is a sound that would otherwise be missed, right? It's when you recede into silence, are you really receding into silence? Nelson, and then I'll go David. Yeah.
Well, just a side comment. I was always particularly fascinated at BJ in the main sanctuary on Shabbos morning when the deer would come and as if they were davening.
We have these big glass windows in the sanctuary, so deer sometimes come through. Yes.
I don't know if you've had that experience yet, Rabbi, but
you know what? Rabbi Hal once pointed out the window and said, "Look at the deer." And I very excitedly looked, and it was a John Deere tractor. So he got me on that one. I haven't actually.
But I read that first sentence in English differently than we're interpreting it now.
Okay.
It says,
Dry.
knows the wonders that God does for God's creations. But God's creations, that's us, do not know the wonders that God does with them.
Yeah.
Which is to say, we don't know the way in which God uses us. Yeah. We're not aware of God. You know, in the everyday of our lives, we think, well, it's just everyday stuff, nothing special. But is it something that God's doing with us that really is special, and we're just not aware of it?
That is such a lovely point. And you're backed up with the Hebrew here, because Shehu Oseh, that God does imahen here, with them. You would think it would be for them, right? That God does all these wonderful things for us, and we don't appreciate how wonderful all of God's works are that God does for us. But here it's with us. Yeah. And that's such a beautiful point, that it is, right, that we are partners in creation, that idea. But also that these miracles don't just occur passively for us, but actively through and with us. Right? It's all relationship, our relationship to each other, our relationship to the natural world. That's what it's, and the lack of that partnership, the lack of that relationship would be to miss out on this sound, to not hear it. To miss all the wonders.
It's not what we would normally think of as a miracle. So like if I'm walking down the street and I'm smiling, someone sees my smile and suddenly feels a little better.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not aware of that.
It's a nice thing for somebody.
But it's important to them in a way in which I'm not aware.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely.
We praise God, davening. What about nature praising God? But in the davening, what hallelujah, got nature praising God.
Yes.
And all these souls.
Yeah. So all of the trees of the forest praise God, right? So it is, we do this, right? And Judaism, which is so careful about not deifying nature because we don't want to be like the pagans or we don't want to be like idolaters. And yet, even our traditional sources acknowledges that there is a deep inner life to all of God's creatures, to trees, obviously to animals, but even the plant world is full of a soul and a life. Yes, Jerry.
Am I missing something, or we're not being told how we can learn to hear?
Let's keep going. Yeah.
So, couple of things. One is, if everybody knows what I call the deer story, I won't tell it again, but if everybody doesn't know it, it sort of ties in with what Nelson was saying, so I could go into it briefly. The other is just the comment that we're using sound here as a metaphor, I think. It's interesting that it's sound, because maybe that is the distinction, that you can just hear, or maybe you can actively listen. Although maybe you could do that with other senses as well. But I think it's just interesting that it's limited to sound, when maybe we should involve all the senses, and even then acknowledge that that's a limitation.
Yeah.
Because there are things beyond our ability to perceive.
Right. But I want to say, I think in rabbinically speaking, I think that the perception to hear, was compared to the ability to understand. Because first of all, what is we're reading Talmud, right? And Midrash, which is what tradition?
Seven Ishma.
Oh, there's not a seven Ishma, right? We will do and we will hear what the people answer at Sinai. When
Oral
God's
Torah.
given us. It's the oral Torah, right? It is Shabbal Peh, right? It is what is transmitted verbally through speaking and hearing. And what is our central creed?
Shema.
Shema Yisrael. Hear, O
Was
Israel.
created with words.
With word, the world was created with words, right? So God spoke the world into existence. So I do think that there is rabbinically an understanding that it is, as Jews, it's something about hearing that is synonymous with understanding. And today we can push back on that and say, hey, like especially for those who are hearing impaired, that doesn't mean. But I think back then they thought, oh well, if you can't hear, then you can't understand or you can't learn. Our mechanisms and our science and technology has developed so much that we know that that's not true, and we have better ways of communicating. But I think back then that was central, the ability to be able to hear.
So if anybody wants to hear the deer story, I could throw it out very briefly. This happened when I was privileged to be the president of the congregation. And two people separately came to me after services with comments. One was, what are you going to do about the deer? The deer is so distracting. What are you going to do about it? The other was, I was davening and it seemed as if the deer was part of the davening. It was such a scary. So one of the lessons that seemed to me of that was listen. Sometimes you just have to listen.
Right. That's nice.
And
there you go. That's perfect tie-in.
yeah, and so and there you are. And the only suggestion I had in the end was if the deer are distracting, since there's not much we can really do about that, sit towards the middle and not towards the window. If you are inspiring, by all means, sit near the window.
That's why you're a person.
Contrasting with the other senses, sound theoretically is something that you can make an impact from the farthest away. Something could be out of your line of sight around the corner, but you still hear it, where you can't touch it or see it or taste or smell it.
Very good.
When you talk about going from one end of the world to the other, that's the biggest distance.
Okay, great. I never thought of that. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. Oh, I forgot about this little. So this piece is, there are many different versions of it, actually. There are multiple versions and they're all told a little bit differently, which is interesting. But there's another version that say, and some say even childbirth is also like the sun, like the rain, like the soul leaving the body, the soul entering the body. Also makes sense. You would think, well, obviously childbirth is very loud and painful, so we do hear that. That could be heard around the world too. But I don't think it's referring to the pain of childbirth. I think it's the soul entering the body, right? And I just want to say on a personal note that with my grandfather passing and Rabbi Alex expecting, and so there is something about the cycles of nature and life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, right, exactly. So let's keep going. Now we're in Ta'anit, another tractate of the Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. Would anybody like to dive in? And the Gemara is the Talmud, right?
I'll read it.
Go for it, thanks.
The Gemara relates, when they were taking leave of one another, Rav Nachman said to Rabbi Yitzhak, Master, give me a blessing.
Okay, I'm going to pause just because I just love to interrupt. I'm sorry, but so if you remember, we did a midrash with Yalta. Remember Yalta and the barrels, the wine barrels, where she destroys all the barrels in her rage. She is married to Rav Nachman, and they were a hosting family, right? She was the daughter of the exilarch, the Jewish leader in the exile in Bavel, and so they would often host people, like they had that merchant who offended Yalta to the point of anger, right? But now they're having another guest. So just to connect us here, we're back at their table. And so Rav Nachman is hosting again, and Rabbi Yitzchak is the guest. And he says, Master, give me a blessing. Before I take leave of you, bless me.
And Rabbi Yitzhak said to him, I will tell you a parable. To what is this matter comparable? He rhymes too, doesn't he? It's comparable to one who was walking through a desert and who was hungry, tired, and thirsty. And he found a tree whose fruits were sweet and whose shade was pleasant, and a stream of water flowed beneath it. He ate from the fruits of the tree, drank from the water in the stream, and sat in the shade of the tree. And when he wished to leave, he said, Tree, tree, with what shall I bless you? If I say to you that your fruits should be sweet, your fruits are already sweet. If I say that your shade should be pleasant, your shade's already pleasant. If I say that a stream of water should flow beneath you, a stream of water already flows beneath you. Rather, I will bless you as follows. May it be God's will that all saplings which they plant from you be like you. So it is with you. With what shall I bless you? If I bless you with Torah, you already have Torah. If I bless you with wealth, you already have wealth. If I bless you with children, you already have children. Rather, may it be God's will that your offspring will be like you.
That's very nice.
Amen.
Very sweet, right? Very, and I misspoke when I introduced this because it is Rav Nachman, the host, who is asking Rav Yitzhak, his guest, for the blessing before he leaves. Right, so I've hosted you, and in payment, you know, quote unquote, just leave with a word of blessing. Give me a blessing before you go. And he said, what can I give you? You already have, you have it all.
Beautiful.
So apart from being deeply beautiful, I'm bringing it for a couple of reasons. One, obviously the Tu B'Shvat overtones. Jerry asked, how can we hear? How can we, you know, you're making the case for how important it is to hear the beauty and the soul that is imbued in all of God's creatures. But how do we begin to hear? And I think the answer lies somewhere with this level of appreciation, right? To say, you know, I get to eat of your fruit and sit in your shade and drink of your water. And that's allegorical here, at least for being Torah and right, all the fruit I've eaten from your fruit and all the, right, you can sort of map and see how he's comparing them throughout. But all I can say is that there be more like you, that you're, you know, for a person, that your students be like you, or that your children be like you. Right, it doesn't just need to be children. It could be students, could be the people, your friends, the people you impact, that you leave such an impression that there be more of you in the world. But so I think that appreciation begins with that, or the hearing begins with that level of appreciation. First, you need that.
That you inspire others.
Yeah. Right.
Sorry, I don't get it.
That's okay. What I mean to, go
I
ahead.
don't see how, what he says is very nice, but I don't see how it answers the question about how I can learn to hear the sound that he described.
Sure. I think in order to start to begin to hear those sounds, I think that comes with the more we learn to appreciate how glorious life is in all of its forms, right? So for instance, this is a plug for our Seder and this book, The Hidden Life of Trees. But when I read that book, I didn't realize how sophisticated trees are. I pass them by all the time. I never really see them. And Nietzsche says that we never see a tree in its entirety. And this is true, right? What happens is we see a branch and our mind fills in the rest. We never actually take the time to look at an entire tree, right? We see a little, we got it. We understand. Our mind fills the rest. So what does it mean as a Jew to say, I'm not going to let my brain do that, where it fills in the gaps? I'm actually going to take the time to look, take in, and really appreciate this magnificent creature in its entirety. So in reading this book, where it tells me, I'm learning more about what trees do and how they're actually social creatures that like send each other nutrients and care for the, and I'll say here's the book starts, and then we get to Helena, but it begins with, he's a forester. He manages forests, but he didn't really realize how complicated the creature was that he was harvesting, right? And he said he stumbled on a stump. It was a dead tree. It was a stump. But when he looked for, and he could have just passed by it like he does all the other stumps.
It wasn't
But
dead.
something caught his attention, and he saw that this stump wasn't dead because it had this green mossy something that I can't tell, I don't know. But it has, which he knew as a tree scientist, that it meant that this tree can't be producing this green life because it's dead. But the trees around it are pumping nutrients into the stump to keep it alive, which again, to me, makes me think as a Jew of Shiva, of Yartzeit, of Yizkor, of mourning, that even when the body of somebody we love has gone, we keep that memory alive. Not that that is a stump, but physically, certainly no longer, but that we do that. We pump nutrients by actively remembering, by keeping their flame and their memory and candle alive, right? So I think a deeper appreciation, which I look at trees differently now, not all the time. And most of the time I still pass by them and I don't give them any, but right, and we're humans and we're busy, right? But I now have a much deeper, so I can't hear all of the beautiful inner life that's happening in a tree at any moment. I can't say that realistically, I can't say that but I'm getting closer. I would say I can, yeah.
When I teach plant life, among them trees, that in drawing and painting, you have to be aware of what goes on in the part that you can't see in order to tell people about the part that is visible, because they are related. And you have to understand what goes on beneath. And that works in terms of drawing people also, or animals. You don't just do the fur and the feathers, because there's stuff going on underneath the fur and the feathers, and you have to understand what's there in order to really give the feeling of the life quality of that creature.
See, I think that's so insightful, and from an artist's perspective, right? That it's not just the physical surface. That wouldn't really inspire you. It's if you can get that inner life, the soul, which you can't hear unless you can tap into this artistic or spiritual way of experiencing the world, interacting with the world. Alina, and then Elliot.
So we have said, yeah, just to finish what Jackie said, we have to observe, not only to look. That's why we have multiple senses. And one of the senses, if it goes down, the other ones take over, step in, and they get more acute, like a blind person. He can hear better than somebody who is not blind, because he's more attuned to everything. Also, we have a saying in Hebrew, "Merov eitzim lo ro'im et hayar." You have so many trees, you don't pay attention to the individual one. You should, and you cannot see the forest.
Right. Beautiful, thank you. Elliot, and then
At some point in life, we all suffer the pain of losing loved ones, but what's giving me comfort, and I know this can be interpreted literally or figuratively, is Mechaye Mesim. Mechaye Mesim, the soul goes on.
Right, so we praise God who gives life to the dead. That's one of our prayers in our Amidah, right, in our standing prayer. God who gives life to the dead. And what's interesting is, so there's Abu Draham, who is a commentator on the prayer book, and he interprets that 3 different ways. Only the third being the literal resurrection, physical resurrection of the dead. But the first 2, one is waking up in the morning. So like people have said Moda'ani and Moda'ani, when you wake up in the morning, that is an experience of Tchiyat HaMeitim, God giving life to the dead, right? And then the second one is actually a natural one, which is the cycle of the growth and renewal of the natural world. That when, it seems that how could from winter come spring? That is a giving life to the dead. So that's a beautiful tie into actually all 3, right? The soul, the sun, and the rain, sort of all in that. That's great.
Another, I don't know, this just occurs to me, but in Tolkien has the idea that he has these creatures called Ents, which are kind of like trees that can move, and they herd the trees. And when you first read that, you say, well, what do you mean herd the trees? The trees don't need herding. They're not like animals. But I think one of the points that the Ents actually make to the other creatures who are all more like us, moving around, constantly moving, is that you do everything too fast. You don't take any time to appreciate anything or see anything. You're so busy moving around.
Right.
So what it seems to the characters is taking a terribly long time to make a decision is really just appreciating every leaf of every tree. So it's beautiful.
Absolutely. Great.
Really,
Oh, yeah,
really
Francis, please.
fast.
Keep going.
We live in an amazing climate, and the fall here is magnificent. So if you think of trees talking to other trees, you hear the rustling of the leaves, and you see the changing of the colors, and you see the actual tree, and you see that kind of perspective. Hey, that's magnificent. Absolutely.
It was part of what brought us back to Cleveland, because in LA, Rabbi Alex would say, I don't get it. You know, everybody's so happy about the 70 degrees and sunny every day, but I don't like it. Like, where is the rhythms of, you don't know when time is passed. You don't sense time passing or see the changing of the leaves. She really missed that. We have two more sources that sort of speak for themselves. So I'll just let us read it and take it in. Who'd like to? This is, so Rav Kook, born 1865. He died 1935. He was the first Ashkenazic chief rabbi of then British Mandate, Palestine. And he was a religious Zionist. So he's credited as being the founder of religious Zionism, as apart from, so yeah.
My father used to call him the rabbi of the Halutzi.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
That's interesting.
Yeah, no, so that's very interesting. So yeah, he's got a lot of really great stuff that I encourage you to read, but does anybody want to read this one? This is just ripped from an old Tu B'Shvat Haggadah that I had seen.
I will.
Go for it.
As it's a Brit.
Move it up.
Yes, go for it.
Once when Rav Kook was walking in the fields, lost deep in thought, the young student with him absent-mindedly plucked a leaf off of a branch. Rav Kook was visibly shaken by this, and turning to his companion, gently said, "Believe me when I tell you that I never simply pluck a leaf or a blade of grass or any living thing unless I have to. Every part of the vegetable world is singing a song and breathing forth a secret of divine mystery of the Creator." That's lovely.
Yeah, nice.
Really lovely.
And then this is just to round out our discussion with the first question of if a tree falls in the woods. So does anybody want to read it? This is from The Hidden Life of Trees, the book we're discussing at the Seder tonight. Go for it.
I'll read it because this is the answer I should have given you when you asked.
It was the answer you gave me.
Oh, wait a minute. Let's finish that. The answer that I would have said, if a tree falls in the forest, do you hear it? If a tree falls in the forest, there are other trees. Listen,
That's nice.
Amazing.
So any closing thoughts before we wrap up today?
If you want to understand.
Yes. Go for it. And oh yeah, then we'll.
All of this reminds me in Tehillim, in Psalms, where it says Hashemayim Safrim Kavod El, that the heavens or the skies tell us, the usual translation is declare, but tells us the glory or the magnificence of God. So that kind of closes that around.
Absolutely, yeah. Love that. One of my favorite verses.
Mine too.
Yeah. Oh, Jackie, did you have something?
Yeah, if you want to understand the nature of deciduous trees, look at the leaf. The leaf is the tree in miniature.
Interesting. Wait, say more.
Yeah. The structure.
You know, if you look at the veins of the leaves.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
It mirrors the way that the tree is oriented?
Wow.
Wow.
And also, dig down during the sleep, the roots do the same.
Really? Wow, I did not know that.
To look at some more leaves.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
You need to look at a tree.
I was gonna say nowadays, we realize sound. Realizing that we are limited by our brains and our auditory systems. And we're able to, because of technology, able to hear things humans can't. So there are a lot more noises out there, and it's possible that there is listening among animals and different things. We just can't perceive it.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking of with dog training, right?
Yeah, with whistle.
Yeah.
They're saying that even possibly, even like with trees, you know, because trees actually physically grow, but the things that are growing, maybe they are actually making sounds. You just can't.
They say the roots that.
You're drawing a tree. You don't draw trees or any growing things from the top down. You come from the ground up. growing the way it grows. That way you feel the spirit of that tree
Wow.
and do what the tree does in relation to life.
And if anybody hasn't seen Jackie's artwork, it's magnificent. Guys, come on.
I'm going somewhere completely different.
Okay.
Going back to the tree in the forest when they're not there, where it's now. Scientifically, the tree falling creates a wave. There's just nothing to accept. There might not be anything there to accept the wave, but the wave is there.
Right.
Okay, that's what I wanted to say about that, but I have a question here about the saplings.
Uh-huh.
What's the difference between the saplings and the children for a tree?
Where are you looking?
So when it says, okay, what should I
Towards
put?
the bottom of the big one on the back,
If you're shading.
4 lines up,
4 lines.
4 lines from the bottom.
May be God's will that all saplings which they plant from you be like you.
Isn't that the children?
Right, but there's no guarantee that the children be like you, right? So you.
No, but he's saying they are.
Well, he says you have children, right? You already have
That's one thing
children.
That they should.
Yeah.
No, but that's down here. He's already said up here that it always is, it already is. So it is with you.
May it be God's will that all saplings.
I'm saying what's the difference between the saplings and the children for a tree?
I don't think there is a difference. I think he's saying, so that just like a tree, like in the story I gave, this is the parable, right? The tree. Now, so be it with you. Now I'm entering back the word, like here, allegory over. Now to you, I'm applying it to you. If I wanted to bless you with Torah, which is the
He's talking, okay, he's no longer talking about the tree.
correct. Now he's saying now you. So
Okay.
be it with you, like Rob Jocelyn, you already have, yeah.
I'm
Does that make sense?
done.
No.
I'm done.
All right, everyone, we're at time, so I want to say thank you for coming and Yasher to all of you and happy Tu B'Shvat.